Okay, give me one word that describes what you thought of the vice presidential debate.
Kangaroo.
Kangaroo?
Oh, you want me to elaborate now?
Yeah, I want you to elaborate.
All right. So the CBS, in their wisdom, had the debate in the same New York studio where for years they filmed Captain Kangaroo. And there were great, fantastic stories were told in those episodes, and great, fantastic stories were told by one shape-shifting boy named JD Vance last night.
Okay, Ruth.
I did not have Captain Kangaroo on my bingo card for this event. But my word is going to be somewhat similar, though perhaps less obscure. It's Oscar-worthy. Dana used my potential other word, which was shape-shifting. I was most struck by the degree to which JD Vance, with no indication of any twinge of embarrassment whatsoever, just presented himself as an entirely new character in the evolving JD Vance oeuvre.
This is Impromptu from Washington Post Opinions. It's a show where we bring you the conversations about the news that we can't stop thinking about. I'm Karen Tumulty, a columnist, and this week we're talking about the vice presidential debate. It's a little over a month until Election Day, and last night was possibly the final chance that Americans are going to get to see two candidates side by side making a big pitch in front of a nationally televised audience. This time, the messengers were Democratic Governor Tim Walz and Republican Senator JD Vance. I'm joined by two of my colleagues to talk about what we learned last night and whether these candidates' performances could sway any voters.
I'm Dana Milbank, columnist for The Post.
I'm Ruth Marcus, and me too.
Karen, before we go further, could you establish the rules? Will there be fact-checking in this podcast?
Can Dana's mic be muted at any point? And who has control of that?
Well, so let's start with the most memorable moments. And Dana, you went right to it.
Yes, it was exactly 30 minutes into the debate, I think, when JD Vance said, the rules said you weren't supposed to fact-check me. Of course, the rules said no such thing. CBS had said, it sort of indicated that they weren't going to do that, and they got a lot of pushback for it. The truth is, I can understand why they might not even want to go down that road, because if you're going to be fact-checking, you'd be doing nothing else. It's just a stream of nonsense. Waltz had his share of them too, but as Ruth was saying, JD Vance was just a fabrication and an invention from minute 1 to minute 108 or however long it went.
Well, so how about you, Ruth? What sticks in your mind?
Well, what sticks in my mind is the question, does all of this really matter? We are here because we love watching debates, and if we're not going to have another presidential debate, we might as well have a vice presidential one. And I have to say, on one level, this was a relief to hear somebody who at least sounded rational and at least sounded human. And I'm talking about JD Vance here, in case anybody is confused, and who shook hands unprovoked, who was able to at least to express some empathy, for example, when Governor Walz talked about his son witnessing a school shooting, and to not have the anger and vitriol of the previous encounter. At the same time, honestly, this one doesn't really matter. There's not a lot of minds left to be made up, to the extent that people are making up their minds.
Well, I agree with you, Ruth. I think anybody who actually sat through that debate was probably already a pretty committed partisan. But the moment that really stuck with me, because I think if you go on style points, it was not a good night for Tim Walz. But he finally sort of came into his own near the very end when they started talking about January 6th. And I thought it was unfortunate that that was so, after probably most people even who tuned in had probably already tuned out. I mean, he was clearly more comfortable on domestic policy, on healthcare, but it was really driving that point home about what had really transpired on January 6th and what JD Vance was trying to gloss over, the violence, the loss of human life. I think that the public would have been served better to have heard that when people were listening.
But Karen, are we just dinosaurs
Yes.
to continue the animal thing? In other words, we think people experience these debates in a linear fashion, and some of us who weren't paid to stay up and watch might have been asleep by the time we rolled around to January 6th, and it was kind of unfortunate. But because we can slice and dice and through social media or other avenues share the clips, maybe the fact that it took him 90 minutes to get his stride doesn't matter as much as the dinosaurs like us think it does.
Yeah, I think that is true. I mean, my understanding is both campaigns are already cutting ads on basic little slivers of this debate.
The constant refrain we have throughout this campaign is nothing matters. And if even the presidential debate where, Trump really flopped, I don't think that changed the contours of the race.
Sorry, guys. Alexa's telling me it's time to deal with my challah.
Mazel
It's
tov.
true. I had a massive challah fail, and I had to make a whole new batch of 4 more challahs this morning. So I apologize to all the listeners, but Happy New Year.
Are you running a bakery over there?
I'm running a. Sorry, we haven't invited you over, Dana.
I know. I love my challah.
All right, guys, it is safe to resume.
Okay, I never really trust these early polls coming out of debates, but it does appear from a couple of them that both of these candidates saw their public approval rise significantly after this debate. I think this was a especially steep hill for JD Vance to climb, given how rocky his rollout as the vice presidential nominee has been. Do you think he helped himself?
Well, it may be a steep hill, but in another sense, there's only one direction to go, and that was up, since he's been so poorly and, just avoiding talk of childless cat ladies. So, yeah, I mean, I suspect it probably helps him at the margin. Vance, I think it's been sort of widely acknowledged, sort of won on technical points as a debater. Walz, he was fine, but, I was kind of surprised. I thought he was a better debater than that. Maybe that was my own failure to pay attention. He was just really stumbling along. And it was even fairly late in the debate when he said that, what was it? Some of his best friends are school shooters. So it was certainly not a great night for him.
Well, the other point is that JD Vance has been spending a lot of his time in interview settings, including in hostile interview settings. And I think that builds up your self-confidence and your sure-footedness. And that showed last night because the Harris Walz campaign has been kind of keeping the vice presidential nominee away from interviews, away from these sorts of settings. And so you could just see how nervous he was from the very moment.
He was incredibly nervous. The interview started out on the question of the Mideast and the Iranian strikes, and that was where it needed to start, given the news of the day. But it was also the worst place for Tim Walz to have it start. If a vice presidential debate is about doing no harm, I think Walz did not do himself harm, and Vance did himself some good to the extent that it's possible to do and that it matters. But I think Walz, you use the word fine, Dana, but then you kind of undercut the fineness by going on to criticize. And I agree with the criticism of his performance. He just left a lot of opportunities on the table. I was really missing. I was like, bring me the prosecutor who was there in the form of Vice President Harris at the presidential debate. I wanted more prosecutor, less school teacher, more, you can do it in a Minnesota nice way, I think, but he just, for most of it, the time, did not jab back at Vance on the, what about when you said this? What about when you said that? I don't think it changes the outcome. I don't think it harms Walz, but it was an opportunity squandered that probably overstates the seriousness of it. And I think, Karen, to your point about how the campaign has kept him kind of bubble wrapped and her kind of bubble wrapped as well, the Harris Walz campaign. That's true, but you go to the campaign with the vice presidential nominee that you have. And we have one who is a adept, used to being cold called at Yale Law School, debater type, and one who's middle school teacher and football coach. And they have different skill sets and different ways of appealing to people. And I don't know if it's advisable for the Vance campaign to be putting him out there so much, tangling with reporters, but I think it is probably advisable for the Harris Walz campaign to minimize the opportunities for slip-ups as much as possible.
And I think the other thing is that split screen was brutal to Tim Walz. Somebody on Twitter said as he kept putting his head down to take notes, he looked like he was taking the written test at the DMV. And, you compare that to how effectively Kamala Harris used the split screen with Trump.
That is true. Maybe what happened in Tim Walz's case was not so much the bubble wrap, but I think maybe a case of over preparation. Well, he was holed up and cramming too much for the debate, and I think he probably had too many things in his head and lines he had memorized and words he wanted to get out there, and I think he probably just froze as a result of having all those things in his head at one point.
I want to get into whether we actually learned anything new about these candidates and how they talked about the issues. First, let's take a quick break.
Hi, this is Megan McArdle. I'm a journalist and opinion columnist here at The Post. And today I want to recommend the podcast called Reflector. Reflector's team and I recently did 3 episodes where we dove deep into America's political history of making claims that a U.S. election was stolen.
A lot of Republicans believe that the election was stolen, and they want Nixon to fight. And Nixon doesn't. He concedes.
Once the decision is made, we unite behind the man who was elected.
I know that many listeners are always on the hunt for a new podcast, and Reflector's not only a place to find great stories, they're also committed to fairness, independence, and nonpartisanship in their coverage of even some of the thorniest issues facing our society. To listen, just search Reflector in whatever app you're using to listen to this podcast right now. And thanks.
Welcome back. I'm Karen Tumulty, and this is Impromptu. So, did you all learn anything new last night about either the candidates or what their campaign strategies are as they go into these final weeks before Election Day?
I would say that it's not learning something so much as reinforcing something we've known for a while, which is the degree to which the abortion issue is just scaring the heck out of Trump and the Republican Party. What it must take for JD Vance to do what he did on abortion, to have really the gall to say, we're going to solve the issue of abortion by both simultaneously taking away women's choice while pretending we're going to give them more choice. that I'm going to say I never supported an abortion ban because I'm going to recast, and we've seen this move from him before. Well, when I say ban, I mean absolute 100% complete ban. They will say or do anything to try to diffuse it before suburban women take out their ire on Republicans in the election.
I was also struck by JD Vance bringing up that personal story of the friend of his who he said had an abortion because she didn't have options. There was a strange kind of logic through that wasn't logic.
Throughout that abortion answer or answers, I wanted to see Tim Walz jump in and say, no, that's not true. And he did say not true, but then he would say, like, they fact checked that in the last debate. And, they did that then. But man, if only he had it at his fingertips and he can go and explain why, no, actually, I did not legalize infanticide in Minnesota.
And I would say one thing I did like about Tim Walz, and I thought he did pretty well on abortion, to say something nice about him since we've been criticizing him, was that instead of this unnamed person dear to him that JD Vance referenced, Tim Walz mentioned actual human beings who we've heard from before. He named the names of people like Amanda Zarowski who were deeply harmed by the delay in obtaining necessary medical care, like Amber Thurman, who died because of Georgia's new abortion law when she could not get the help she needed in time to treat her sepsis. I thought he really humanized that, while Vance was kind of faux humanizing things.
So both of you think that nobody was really persuaded by either candidate last night. That was the last big sort of programmed event before the election. Kamala Harris is going to have an interview on 60 Minutes coming up. That Donald Trump has declined the invitation. What can possibly shake up this election in the next month? Or is this just going to be a 48-48 slog to the end?
It may well be, but who could have predicted all of the things that would have happened over the last month or the last couple of months? I mean, who knows what's going on in the head of Donald Trump? Does he say, wait a second, JD Vance got all these rave reviews for last night. I better go back and have another debate. I mean, who the hell knows? He might attempt something like that. But at the same time, yeah, it is going to be a slog, and it always was going to be, just because of the way our politics is set and polarized. But what we don't know is, does the situation in Israel and Iran erupt into something much, God forbid, much worse? Do gas prices go through the roof? Is there some other thing that we don't know right now that's going to happen over the next, what are we down to, 34 days?
Well, with that, I want to thank you both for joining me for another episode of Impromptu.
It was a pleasure, Karen, and may Ruth Challah rise to perfection.
I'm going to go braid it right now, and thank you for your indulgence.
Before you go, here's a quick word from our humor columnist, Alexandra Petri.
The vice presidential debate was Tuesday on CBS. It was very polite. There was no name-calling. Well, not of the people in the room. Hannibal Lecter did not come up a single time. It turns out that if you subtract Donald Trump from a room, you can actually have something that sounds like a normal conversation. But I'm not sure actually that all that politeness was good. I agree in general, it's good to be polite. When you walk past someone on the sidewalk, you want that person to make room for you, not reveal that their umbrella is a shiv and stab you in the eye. There are plenty of times when you politely agree, even though what the other person is saying doesn't strike you as true. Sometimes you're having coffee with a friend and the friend launches into a story about their terrible ex, in which it becomes more and more apparent that your friend is in fact the villain. And then you can say something, or you can think, no point. Let's have a nice afternoon. We're not here to argue. But there are some times when you are there to argue, and I would say that maybe The debate with Donald Trump's running mate is one of those times. So, if your opponent says, boy, we're really seeing eye to eye. If only it weren't for my pesky running mate, we'd be in total agreement. Well, that is why you're here, though, and it's not actually rude to point that out. Just as yelling is generally rude, but if what you're yelling is, duck, here comes a projectile, it's actually politer to yell. This is Donald Trump we're talking about. Donald Trump has taken people's reproductive freedom away. Even if JD Vance says he was just trying to give women more options, it's not rude to say, that doesn't sound like more options. Donald Trump is not a normal political figure. He did not exactly accept the results of the election. I, for one, think that's extremely rude. And if you can't point that out without being impolite, well, there are more important things than politeness.
This episode was produced by Hadley Robinson, edited by Demir Marusik, Chris Sulentrop and Allison Michaels, and mixed by Emma Munger. Chris Rucan designed our art, and special thanks to Millie Mitra and Deidre Byrne. Thanks for listening to Impromptu. We love hearing from you. Email impromptu@washpost.com. And if you like the show, leave us a review or tell your friends about us.